On its surface, God of War 2 may seem like a story about a lone warrior desperately battling against destiny itself. After all, the primary antagonist of the game are the Sisters of Fate, literal living representations of fate. Divine beings of incredible power who supposedly have the ability to determine the destiny of every living thing, every god and every mortal. However, near the end of the game, it is revealed that this story is actually the exact opposite. For all their pompous talk of being the sole deciders of destiny, the Sisters of Fate are a total sham. After two of the sisters are killed by Kratos in battle, he reaches the inner chamber of the Temple of the Fates, a gallery which contains multiple murals depicting scenes of the future, including this one, along with an inscription which reads, "A lone soul surveys the wake of carnage that surrounds him." This mural almost perfectly matches the final scene of God of War 3, in which Kratos stands alone on a cliff top, surveying the aftermath of his cataclysmic war against the gods, the death of Zeus and the fall of Olympus. It is a gray, storm-swept wasteland. Tens of thousands are dead. The fact that this mural stands in the heart of the Temple of Fates indicates that this prophecy must have been foretold a very, very long time ago. This means that Kratos is not the one battling against his fate. He is fulfilling fate. He was always destined to destroy Olympus. It is the sisters who are trying to subvert this destiny. They discovered that the currents of fate were flowing in a direction they did not like, and so they tried to divert those waters down another path, one more to their liking. But they failed. Either Kratos, or destiny itself, was too powerful to be stopped, and instead of changing fate, the sisters were broken by it. This is kind of a fascinating twist. The story's literal, living representations of fate are revealed to be just as trapped by prophecy as everyone else, just as motivated by selfishness and greed and a lust for power as every other corrupt god in this series. But why? Why are they doing this? Well, that question is never answered explicitly anywhere in the game. The sisters are never given an evil villain's final monologue, where they pontificate over their master plan. Their motivations remain a mystery, but I think a potential explanation lies in a second mural that was hidden in that same chamber. This one reads, "The all-consuming battle between the Titans and the Olympians rages on." I believe this is intended to be another prophecy of the future, which is once again fulfilled by the events of God of War 3. Once upon a time, the world of Greek mythology was ruled by the Titans, beings of immense power, and the Titans were ruled by Kronos, the most powerful Titan of all. Eventually, in a convoluted series of events, he was overthrown by his children in a rebellion led by his son Zeus, who became the leader of a new pantheon of gods, the Olympians. The war between the Olympians and the Titans was terrible, apocalyptic even, but eventually it ended in the Titans' defeat, and the current world order, with Zeus's Olympians ruling over mortals, was established. However, this mural reveals that this war was always destined to begin again, to rage on, and it would become an all-consuming war, cataclysmic, meaning that it would destroy everything, both Titan and Olympian, that there would be no victor. This is exactly what happens at the end of God of War 3, when both Zeus and Gaia, along with most of their followers, are dead. I think this is the fate that these sisters are attempting to prevent from coming to pass. They do not want to see their world destroyed in the fires and ash of a new war between the gods. Maybe this is a benevolent motivation, a desire to save innocent lives, to prevent mass death and suffering, or maybe it is purely selfish, a desire to cling on to their own power, their own pride of place in the current world order. After all, as we will see later, the sisters do not seem to care very much about the value of human life. Either way, this prophecy of doom was so terrible that even fate itself recoiled. The sisters decided to do everything in their power to prevent it from coming true. And so what do they actually do? Well, through the threads of fate, they have power over individual lives, and they use this power to create living obstacles to place in Kratos' path, to prevent him from reaching the heart of their temple, because that is where he is destined to find the means to free the Titans and unleash them on Mount Olympus, thus dooming the current world order. God of War 2 is filled with boss fights against famous characters from Greek mythology. For example, there is Theseus, the legendary founder of Athens, or Perseus, a great hero and great-grandfather of Hercules, or Icarus from the classic fable of flying too close to the sun. These encounters can feel really random. They tend to come out of nowhere with almost no narrative foreshadowing whatsoever and very little explanation of what these characters are even doing on the island of creation in the first place. Like, what the heck is Icarus even doing here? He is supposed to die at the end of his story, to drown in the Aegean Sea after his wax wings are melted by the sun. His fable has nothing to do with the Sisters of Fate. Of course, the true reason for this is that the developers of the God of War series tend to play pretty fast and loose with their source material. The developers care a lot less about making sure their depiction matches actual mythology, and a lot more about making a great video game, using that source material to piece together the new story they are trying to tell. But I like to think that the in-universe explanation for why Icarus' story in God of War 2 is so different from the original fable is because of the Sisters of Fate. They have used their power over the threads of fate to change his story. Instead of flying too close to the sun and his wings melting from the heat and falling down into the sea to drown, somehow he survives. And his wings survive too. Somehow these sisters manipulate his story in such a way that he appears here, now, on this bridge, right as Kratos arrives. A new, living obstacle in his path, another attempt by the sisters to change the future, and they manipulate and transform the stories of all those other characters for the same purpose. They are rewriting Greek mythology to suit their own desires. With this theory in mind, I think their choices of which characters to place in his path reveal things about their thought process. So we have Theseus and Perseus, who are classic legendary Greek heroes, both famous for defeating seemingly unbeatable monsters. The sisters bring them to the island because, hey, maybe they will have the experience or the ability necessary to defeat someone like Kratos too. Or there is the Barbarian King. This is not a character from Greek mythology. This is a character from the God of War series, from the first game. The Barbarian King is the guy who led the horde that defeated Kratos' original Spartan army in battle, which was the catalyst for Kratos calling out to Ares for help in the first place. In some ways, this guy set the entire series into motion. The sisters have changed his story, because if he defeated Kratos once, maybe he can do it again. Of course, Icarus is not a warrior at all. He is just a reckless kid with a pair of wax wings crafted for him by his father. Though in God of War 2 he has been aged up into a smelly and senile old man who has clearly lost his mind. I think Icarus is intended by the sisters to be something of a free radical, an element of pure chaos. Like, this guy is crazy. He is totally bonkers. The sisters probably think, well, let's throw him at Kratos and just see what happens. Maybe we don't need a warrior. Maybe we just need a little bit of madness. But that does not work either, and actually backfires. Kratos takes the artificial wings for himself, allowing him to penetrate even deeper into their stronghold. The most interesting, and by far the most effective, the most devastating living obstacle these sisters place in his path is this guy, a character known as the Last Spartan. He is probably the least impressive and certainly least famous of all the characters Kratos battles in the game. He is just an ordinary guy, a mortal human warrior. However, despite this, he actually ends up doing the most damage in the end. Not physically, but emotionally. He almost destroys Kratos. He comes closer than anyone else to finishing the job, but not in the way you might expect. To understand who this guy is and why he becomes such an effective psychological weapon, we need to rewind all the way back to the start of the game. Okay, so at the end of the first game, Kratos defeated Ares and was given his place as the god of war in the Greek pantheon. But Kratos never wanted to be god of war. Even getting revenge on Ares for the death of his wife and child was really only a secondary goal. Kratos is a man haunted by the nightmares of his past, by all of the terrible things he has done, including the accidental murder of his family. And what he really wanted, his primary motivation in the first game, was for the gods of Olympus to cure him of those nightmares, and by extension, thematically free him of his guilt. However, at the end of the first game, Athena reveals that this is impossible. His sins are so terrible that not even the gods themselves have the power to wash them away. So as a sort of consolation prize, they raise him to godhood and grant him the title of God of War. The second game begins with him sitting on his throne on Mount Olympus. In spite of the pair of hot babes fawning all over him in this opening scene, he is psychologically alone. His family is still dead, the gods of Olympus do not want anything to do with him. The only relationship left in his life is his relationship with the warriors of Sparta. So he throws himself totally and wholly into that relationship as a distraction from the sins of his past. He interacts with these Spartan warriors in the only way he knows how. He leads them in battle. He leads them on a devastating and bloody war of conquest across Greece, which draws the ire of Zeus. God of War 2 begins with Kratos leading the Spartan army on an invasion of the city of Rhodes. This invasion ends in disaster. Kratos is tricked into relinquishing his godly powers and then killed by Zeus, who then goes on to slaughter all of the Spartan warriors present, all except one, this guy. He is the sole human survivor of the Siege of Rhodes, and Kratos, after once again dragging himself out of the underworld, commands this survivor to return home and defend Sparta, while Kratos embarks on a grand journey to the Island of Creation, the home of the Sisters of Fate, to change his destiny and defeat Zeus. During his adventure on the island, while he explores its primordial forests and ancient ruins, Kratos encounters the sisters just 3 times before their final battle at the heart of the island. The first is at the entrance. These sisters speak to him through this statue. They say, "Hear me, fallen god. None defy what the fates decree. That is how it must be. Only death awaits you at the end of your journey." In this first interaction, the sisters present themselves as the sole arbitrators of the future. They are the ones who get to decide what happens next, and they have decided that Kratos is a loser. Of course, as I've already discussed, this is a bluff. They are just putting on a performance. They are just as bound by fate as everyone else. They are trying to intimidate Kratos, to scare him away, and it does not work. Their second and third appearances take place inside the Palace of the Fates. There are these 2 auditoriums, each of which contains a priest, men who have, apparently, devoted their lives to the worship and service of the Divine Sisters. But their lives actually serve a different purpose. They are here to be killed. The auditorium contains a sacrificial altar and a holy book written in a language that can only be read by a priest of the sisters, by these 2 guys. In order to meet the sisters, anyone who comes here must complete this ritual, so Kratos has to force these priests to read the ritual text and then murder them, sacrifice them on the altar. It is a very ugly scene. I think one of the ugliest things he has ever done in any of the games. But all of the blame for this murder cannot be laid solely at his feet. It was the sisters who crafted this cruel ritual. They are the ones who decided to require a human sacrifice as part of their meet and greet process. And this is not the only human life they casually throw away. Their island and temples are absolutely filled to the brim with corpses. Hundreds, if not thousands of people have died here attempting to have an audience with the sisters. From this ritual, we learn that these Sisters of Fate are cruel, that they wield human life as a mere tool and throw it away like garbage when they are done. We learn that they do not value human life at all. Of course, neither does Kratos, or Zeus, or Gaia, or the Olympians, or the Titans. No one really cares about ordinary human lives in this setting. The Greek God of War games are very, very bleak in that respect, and there is no one to root for here. But I am getting lost in a tangent. After completing these two grotesque rituals of human sacrifice, Kratos is rewarded with a short audience with a holographic version of one of the sisters. The first seems to be a generic pre-recorded message. The sister says, "Well done, warrior. With this sacrifice you have proven your resolve to seek out the Sisters of Fate. However, this is but a small step in your quest to gain an audience with us." And that's it. It reveals very little about their character. The second audience is much more interesting. This time she addresses Kratos by name. She says, "Kratos, like the fiery phoenix who is resurrected from his ashes, you too search for a second chance at life. Find these ashes and free the phoenix. Only then will you find the path to the Temple of the Fates." This is a very surprising bit of dialogue. Remember, in their first interaction, the sisters tried to intimidate Kratos, to warn him away, but now their attitude seems to have completely changed. They are offering him guidance, explaining how to progress, how to reach them. And the reason for this change is that they are trying to lure him into a trap. At this point in the story, every single one of their physical obstacles has failed. Kratos is simply too strong to be stopped that way. So now they are going to try something new. Instead of attacking him physically, they are going to assault him psychologically. And this is going to be their most effective and most devastating weapon of all. Along the path to the Phoenix, they have placed the Last Spartan, the sole survivor of the Siege of Rhodes we met back in the first chapter of the game. The sisters have once again used their power over the threads of fate to place a living obstacle in Kratos' path. This battle takes place in shadow, so that Kratos cannot see who he is fighting. The battle is a surprisingly easy one, far easier than any of the previous boss fights against the other characters I talked about earlier. But at the end of the battle, after the last Spartan has already been struck down by his blades, Kratos finally realizes who he was fighting. In his final moments, the last Spartan explains how he came to be here. After the slaughter of the Spartan warriors in Rhodes, and after Kratos departed on his quest to reach the Sisters of Fate, Zeus attacked Sparta. He destroyed the whole city, annihilated its entire population as punishment for their support of Kratos. Once again, there was only one survivor, this guy who has some crazy good luck. Afterwards, even though he is just a mere mortal, he took it upon himself to journey to the island of creation, to seek the sisters, to change the fate of his home and family. And the sisters, manipulating events from a distance, allowed him to come this far, to reach this specific chamber at this specific moment, so that he and Kratos would meet in battle. Remember how I explained at the start of this game that Kratos adopted the warriors of Sparta as a new family, his only relationship with another group of people in all the world. And now that family is dead, and not only is it his fault, but by the twisted and evil machinations of the sisters, he is the one who accidentally struck the final blow. He personally killed the last Spartan, the last member of his adopted family. For the second time in his life, he has been manipulated by the gods into slaughtering his own family. This is the perverse brilliance of the Sisters of Fate, and this is the one plan that actually works. Kratos could probably kill 1,000,000 Greek heroes in battle and not even flinch, but this attack strikes much deeper, much closer to his old, unhealed wounds. This one actually hurts. For the second time in his life, Kratos gives up. When he is attacked by this Kraken immediately after the death of the Last Spartan, he does not fight back. If you press a button on the controller, the character on screen literally refuses to obey the player's commands. I have never seen anything like it in any other video game. Instead of doing what you tell him, Kratos just shouts, "I am tired of the lives of the gods." When the Kraken grabs him in one of its tentacles and begins pulling him towards its open mouth, he still does not fight back. He appears to accept his fate. At the last moment, it is Gaia who intervenes, who persuades him to keep fighting. And someday I will do a deconstruction of Villainy on her too, because she is a pretty bad lady herself, but that is a topic for another day. If it was not for Gaia's intervention, I think Kratos would have actually died here. Their plan would have succeeded. The Sisters of Fate tend to get overshadowed by the more exciting and more famous villains in the series, like Ares or Zeus, but the Sisters are genuinely dangerous and sinister in their own right. They only failed because an even more powerful and more manipulative antagonist intervened. After this failure, the sisters only make one more appearance in the game, their final battle. When Kratos arrives in the inner chamber of the Temple of the Fates, Lachesis, who very annoyingly has one of her tatas hanging out for the entire game, which means I have to blur it out of every single goddamn scene, thanks a lot Santa Monica, you horny bastards. But anyway, Lachesis makes one final attempt to manipulate Kratos. One last attempt to change not his fate, but her own, to save herself. She tells him, "Your resolve is admirable, even if it is misguided. None can change their destiny, Kratos. We sisters determine the fates of all. It was I who deemed the Titans would lose the Great War, and I who have allowed you to come this far. It is not your destiny to kill Zeus." I believe that this is a lie. As we have seen, she has done absolutely everything in her power to stop Kratos from coming this far and failed. This last attempt is something of a desperate Hail Mary. Notice the way she places her hand on his shoulder here, the physical intimacy. She cannot defeat him in battle, and she has no more psychological weapons left in her arsenal. But hey, maybe she can seduce him. After all, everyone knows that Kratos enjoys a roll in the hay with a couple of hot, topless babes every now and then. Unfortunately for her, no circle prompt appears above her head this time, and so the battle commences. Of course, as soon as this fight begins, she has already lost. The power of the Sisters of Fate lies in their ability to manipulate time, to control the lives of individual people, not in their combat prowess. They are somewhat unusual villains in the God of War series for that reason. However, despite that, they do still have one deadly trick left up their sleeves, which I will discuss shortly. This battle has 4 phases. The first is a pretty straightforward smash-off between Kratos and Lachesis. And I should mention here, this is one of my favorite boss fights in the whole series. It is fast, it is fun, the setting is super cool, it goes to some crazy places, and it does a great job of mixing both puzzles and platforming into the fight. Most bosses in the God of War series only test your command of the combat system, but the Sisters of Fate feel like a much more comprehensive challenge. You have to use your time powers, you have to maneuver through platforming sequences, you have to solve puzzles. I think it is just fantastic game design. It might actually be the best boss fight in the whole series. Anyway, like I said before, the first phase is a straightforward smash-off, but the second phase is much more interesting. After fending off Lachesis, a second sister appears. This one is Atropos, who has a much darker and more witchy design in contrast to the elegance of Lachesis. This second phase demonstrates the sisters' control over the flow of time. She transports Kratos into the past, back to the final battle against Ares in the first game. In that game, if you will remember, Ares strips Kratos of his weapons, leaving him defenseless and vulnerable. But then at the last moment, just before he is about to be killed, Kratos realizes that this bridge, which connected the city of Athens to this mountain, was actually a giant stone sword left for him by the gods. And then he wields that sword when he finally defeats Ares. Okay, so Atropos transports Kratos onto that bridge during the first phase of his battle with Ares, before he lost his weapons. Instead of trying to defeat him in battle, Atropos tries to defeat Kratos by changing his past. She tries to destroy this sword so that his past self will never be able to defeat Ares in the first place. I think this is super duper cool. I love this phase of the fight. Just conceptually, I've never seen anything else like this in a video game before. Traveling back into the past, into a previous game in the series, to affect the events of a previous final boss fight, while you are fighting the current game's final boss fight. Just crazy. Genius game design. This phase ends with present Kratos incapacitating Atropos, while past Kratos seizes the sword and begins his final battle with Ares. The third phase is very similar to the first, except now Atropos joins in by attacking through these mirrors, which Kratos shatters one by one. He traps both sisters inside the final mirror before destroying it, which apparently kills them both. The battle is not over yet though, because there is still one sister remaining. This is Clotho, the third sister of Fate, and she has a very different visual design. The first two sisters more or less looked like ordinary human women, but Clotho is a massive, bloated, disgusting creature, a mountain of putrid, rotten flesh, and for some reason, I guess just because somebody at Santa Monica felt like God of War 2 had not met its bare naked nipple quota yet, she is covered head to toe in boobies. Big, fat, saggy, ugly boobies everywhere. With the change in visual design, I think the developers are doing something that I have frequently discussed in other videos, including the last one about Ares. There are a lot of video game villains who start out looking relatively normal and human, but then when you reach the final boss fight, they suddenly transform into hideous, monstrous shapes. The Resident Evil series is particularly famous for this. In this way, the villain's outer appearance changes to match their inner wickedness. Ares did the exact same thing during his boss fight in the first game, when these horrific insectoid appendages burst out of his spine. Early on in the game, the player is only shown Lachesis, who is elegant and beautiful, and she's got her boobie out, yippee. The point is, she does not look like a stereotypical villain. But then the final battle begins and we meet Atropos, who is much darker and witchier, much closer to what we would expect a villain's appearance to be. And then with Clotho, it is revealed that these Sisters of Fate are not just villains, they are disgusting. They are corrupt and rotten and foul. They are monsters. And that characterization is developed by the progression in visual design, from elegance to horror. Anyway, this final phase is really not a fight at all. It is an extended platforming and puzzle sequence, which ends with Clotho getting a scythe lodged in her head, thus ending the reign of the Sisters of Fate once and for all. As I mentioned earlier, these sisters tend to not get as much attention from fans as the other villains in the series. Ares and Zeus and Baldur and Odin tend to steal the show, and I myself said in my retrospective of the second game that I do not think the sisters have nearly as much character development as those other villains. They just don't get a lot of screen time. With that said, I do find them very interesting. In some ways, I think the God of War series is, at its core, a story about corruption. In my video on Ares, I discussed how he corrupts the entire Greek pantheon. God of War shows the audience a version of Greek mythology, where all of the famous heroes are depicted to be nothing more than arrogant schmucks, stupid smug asshats, who are as much struck down by their own pride as by Kratos' blades. Every single god in this series' version of the setting is revealed to be cruel and manipulative and greedy, and they only care about themselves. And in the second game, even fate itself is revealed to be corrupt. Even destiny is bullshit. The Sisters of Fate are hideous and monstrous. They are liars. What they call fate is really just their own personal selfish desires. These Sisters of Fate are very representative of the way God of War twists the source material in this dark and compelling way. And it is interesting to examine how the theme of fate has changed between God of War 2 and Ragnarok. In some ways, Kratos and Atreus in Ragnarok are actually trying to do something very similar to what these Sisters of Fate were trying to do in God of War 2, subverting prophecy. However, because Kratos and Atreus accomplish this through empathy and understanding and community, the story rewards them, whereas the sisters, who operate in cruelty and manipulation and lies, are ultimately destroyed. And this is where my analysis of these Sisters of Fate comes to an end. Next time, we are going to do something a little different. I am going to be discussing a game in the God of War series that most people have never played, and a lot of people have probably never even heard of. I am going to be doing a retrospective of God of War Betrayal, the sort of clunky and bizarre action platformer mobile Java spin-off. I had never played it before and was not sure what to expect going in, but I have discovered that Betrayal is actually a lot cooler than I thought it was going to be. But that is a discussion for next time, because this video is done.